Welcome to the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium's Mathematics Item Review Considerations training module. The Smarter Balanced Assessment System will use a variety of items and tasks to collect evidence about student development of the Common Core State Standards and college and career readiness. These items will range from brief selected response items that target specific concepts and skills to more elaborate constructed response items, extended response items, and performance tasks that require the application of mathematics concepts to complex real-world scenarios. This module describes the structure and organization of the Item Review Committee and the expectations of committee members. The module also examines the key considerations that review committee members should focus on when reviewing mathematics stimuli, items, and tasks, and how to determine the acceptability of items, tasks, and stimuli. Let's begin with an overview of the Item Review Committee. The role of an Item Review Committee is to determine whether or not items, tasks, and stimuli meet the Smarter Balanced specifications for quality. Item review committees are composed of a facilitator and a small group of committee members. Group sizes generally vary from 5 to 10 members. There are several key expectations Smarter Balanced has established for review committee members. First, members are expected to apply the information contained in this module when reviewing items, tasks, and stimulus materials. They must work collaboratively with other committee members and be willing to listen to and respect the views of fellow committee members. It is important for committee members to hold high expectations for the quality of items, tasks, and stimulus materials, and to provide honest and constructive feedback for each item, task, or stimuli reviewed. When reviewing the quality of items, members' focus should be on the content of the item, task, or stimuli. Know that other review committees will focus on other aspects such as accessibility, bias, and sensitivity. As explained in detail next, content reviewers should consider whether the content of the item is appropriate for the claim and assessment targets measured by an item. To perform this role, committee members must be familiar with and understand the information contained in Common Core State Standards, the Smarter Balanced content specifications, and item and task specifications. Finding and/or writing quality stimuli is the first step in writing quality items. Stimuli must comply with the stimulus specifications. They must also be appropriate for the claim with respect to content, context, complexity, and real-world scenarios. They should focus on the grade-level appropriate topics that were explored in detail in the grade-level considerations training modules. The content of stimuli must also be current and accurate when using stimuli that present factual information. Stimuli must be well written and free of grammatical and mechanical errors and adhere to all aspects of the style guide. When reviewing items and tasks, there are also several issues committee members must consider. The first consideration focuses on alignment. All items and tasks must be aligned with the primary claim and target for which the item or task was developed. A second consideration focuses on depth of knowledge. All items are assigned a depth of knowledge level. It is important to carefully review each item and consider whether the cognitive processes required by the item aligns with the depth of knowledge assigned to the item. To make these judgments, committee members must be familiar with the information about claims and assessment targets presented in the Smarter Balanced content specifications and the item and task specifications. When reviewing items and tasks, it is important to consider the accuracy of content, answer keys, and scoring materials. For all selected responses, committee members are expected to carefully examine answer options and consider whether the keyed response is correct and whether responses identified as distractors are in fact incorrect. In addition, it is important to consider whether each distractor represents a plausible response. Similarly, for all constructed response items, it is important to consider whether the scoring guidelines are accurate and whether the exemplar responses that accompany each score point accurately reflect the criteria for that score point. In addition to considering the accuracy of scoring information, committee members must also consider the accuracy of information presented in the stimuli and stem of the item. all information must be accurate unless the item specifically measures students' ability to identify errors or inaccuracies. The content of items and tasks must also be grade level appropriate. When examining the content of items and tasks, it is important to focus on the knowledge and skills required to respond to the question presented in the prompt. This content consideration requires committee members to consider whether the knowledge and skill required to produce a correct response for the item or task is the same knowledge and skill that is defined in the assessment target that the item or task was designed to measure. The knowledge and skill required by the item or task must align with the knowledge and skill defined by the assessment target. In addition, it is important to consider whether a knowledge and skill that is not associated with the assessment target is also required to respond correctly to the item or task, and whether this non-targeted knowledge and skill may interfere with the measure of the assessment target. This consideration requires judgment, and committee members must think carefully about the extent to which non-targeted knowledge and skill is essential for answering correctly. The more essential non-targeted knowledge and skills are for responding correctly, the more problematic the item or task is likely to be. As was described in detail in the Grade Level Considerations training module, it is important to consider the readability of text that forms the stem of items and tasks, and the response options for selected response items. The readability of stems and response options should always be one grade below the grade level for which the item or task was written. The readability and complexity of text that forms the stem and answer options should never influence the difficulty of responding correctly to the item or task. Finally, all content associated with an item or task must be clearly written and free of editorial errors. Prior to reviewing items and tasks, committee members are encouraged to revisit the examples of flawed and exemplary items and tasks presented in the selected response, constructed response, and technology-enhanced items and the extended response and performance task modules. When reviewing an item or task, it is important to review both the item or task itself and the item table that accompanies it. The item table specifies several pieces of information that should be considered when evaluating the quality of an item or task. As an example, this is a Grade 3 sample item taken from the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium Mathematics Item and Task Specifications. This is a selected response item that requires students to evaluate 4 expressions and indicate whether each answer is in the desired range. This is the item table that accompanies the item. The item table indicates that this item was written for Grade 3. The item was designed to elicit evidence for Claim 1, Assessment Target 1. The depth of knowledge is defined at Level 1. And the answer key indicates that the correct response for the first response part is yes. The second and third parts are no, and the final part is yes. When reviewing this item, it is important to consider whether the content of the item and the cognitive processes required to respond correctly to the item are aligned with the assessment target and claim specified in the item table. Similarly, it is important to consider whether the cognitive processes required to respond correctly are consistent with the depth of knowledge specified. Finally, care must be taken to ensure the keyed response is accurate. If any of these considerations yield a negative finding, the item should be identified as potentially problematic. This module presented several important issues Item Content Review Committee members should consider when reviewing items and tasks. Among these considerations are the accuracy of information presented in stimuli, stems, response options, and scoring materials, the readability and complexity of stems and response options and stimulus material, the grade level appropriateness of item content, the extent to which the item or task requires the application of knowledge and skills that are aligned with assessment targets, the extent to which non-targeted knowledge and skills are not required to respond correctly, the extent to which the cognitive complexity of the item or task is aligned with the depth of knowledge level assigned to the item, and finally, the extent to which the item or task is written clearly and free of grammatical, spelling, punctuation, mechanical, and other editorial errors. Considering each of these issues will help review committee members identify items, tasks, and stimulus material that do not meet the standards for high quality established by the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium.